and welcome back to Blu-ray Boutique. I'm your co-host, Tim Rosenberger.
And I'm your co-host, Rosalie Lewis.
And today we are going to celebrate the birthday of the person you just heard speak before me. It is Rosalie's birthday this month, and for that, she decided to pick two movies that came out the summer that she was born. They both came out in July. One is Escape from New York, which came out, I think, July 10th or so. And then that was the John Carpenter film with Kurt Russell. And then we also have Blowout, which came out, I think, a couple weeks later. Again, also in 1981, which stars John Travolta and directed by Brian De Palma. So, Rosalie, why did you pick these films out of all these summer films and all the 1981 films you could have picked? Why did you pick these two?
First of all, I wanted to pick two movies that I know I like because it's not as fun for me to talk about movies that I don't enjoy. Less for us to talk. I mean, not always less for us to talk about, I suppose. But I like to stay on the more positive side of things. I also felt like there were certain things about each one that, even though they came out 41 years ago, still had some connections to our current political moment. And I'm sure we'll talk more about that as we get into these films. But yeah, it was interesting because both of them are politically inspired, I would say. You know, even though maybe the current events are not the same as what inspired these movies, there certainly are some parallels there. So yeah, those reasons, but also just the surface level. Like, I really enjoy Brian De Palma. I really enjoy John Carpenter. And these are two movies from both of them that I really, enjoyed and wanted to introduce other people to if they hadn't seen them.
Okay, so Escape from New York takes place in New York in the far future of 1997.
Indeed.
Basically, this is a kind of dystopian science fiction alternate reality, not reality, but alternate future type dealy-do.
In 1988, the crime rate in the United States rises 400%. The once great city of New York becomes the one maximum security prison for the entire country. A 50-foot containment wall is erected along the New Jersey shoreline, across the Harlem River, and down along the Brooklyn shoreline. It completely surrounds Manhattan Island. All bridges and waterways are mined. The United States police force, like an army, is encamped around the island. There are no guards inside the prison, only prisoners and the worlds they have made. The rules are simple. Once you go in, you don't come out.
The commissioner of that giant prison is Hawk, played by Lee Van Cleef. And the president, played by Donald Pleasant. His plane, Air Force One, has been shot down, has been sabotaged. Basically, it crashes down into the prison. And Donald Pleasant, as the president, has escaped in an escape pod, but he's taken prisoner by some of the prisoners who are led by the Duke, played by Isaac Hayes, the ever-cool Isaac Hayes. And the prisoners have told Hawk,
"You touch me, he dies. If you're not in the air in 30 seconds, he dies. If you come back in, he dies."
So Hawk sends in a prisoner who's going to go in there anyway, Snake Plissken, played by Kurt Russell.
S.D. Plissken, American, Lieutenant, Special Forces Unit Black Light. 2 Purple Hearts, Leningrad and Siberia. Youngest man to be decorated by the president.
But for some reason, I don't think we're ever told, decided to rob a high-security bank and now is being thrown into the prison. But Hawks tells Snake that if he rescues the president, brings him back in time for this world summit thing with America, Russia, and China, brings him along with a suitcase that has an important tape otherwise known as the MacGuffin of the movie, in a 24-hour, but really 22-hour period, that Snake will be pardoned for everything he's done and he can go free. Snake reluctantly goes along with it, and he almost has to at some point, because if he does not get back, bringing the president back in time, some machinery mumbo jumbo that they have sneakily injected into his neck will explode and he will bleed to death. So Snake goes in, and along the way he meets a friendly cabbie played by Ernest Borgnine. His name is Cabby, and he also enlists the help of an old friend slash confidant slash person he's mad at because he left him to die, Harold Brain Hellman, played by the ever wonderful Harry Dean Stanton, and his woman, for lack of a better word, Maggie, played by Adrina
Adrian Barbeau.
Barbeau. And they go off to try to save the president from the evil, but still cooler than everybody else in this movie, the Duke. First off, when did you first, I mean, when I first saw this movie, it was actually yesterday as we record this, but when did you first see this, Rosalie?
So I want to say it was probably like 15 years ago or so. And I remember I had seen The Thing, loved it. I definitely had seen They Live at that point, which Kurt Russell's not in, but it's another, John Carpenter movie. And so I believe I was working at Disc Replay at the time, which people would always recommend movies, and the people that work there, we were always talking about movies. And somebody was like, "You've never seen Escape from New York?" And so, of course, I watched it. And of course, I was won over by it. It's hard not to love Kurt Russell in an eye patch, like trying to do a bunch of vigilante justice to save the president. So, yeah, I definitely fell hard for this movie. And I also am always charmed when I'm watching a movie where the future of the movie is the past for me. It's just a weird kind of dichotomy that is entertaining. And honestly, it's funny that the future, even in this movie, it was only 16 years after, the time that it came out. So Carpenter had a really dark view of what was going on in the world at that time if he thought we were going to kind of fall apart in that short of a time period.
Mm-hmm. Probably the only 2 decades this could have been made in that would have served it the best would have been the 70s and the 80s.
Yeah.
Because there's like so much grime in this movie. It's just like it's a filter in the camera or something. Everything's just very, except for I guess the Lee Van Cleef headquarters place. The entire city of New York is just, which is actually shot in, I think they shot most of it in East St. Louis in Illinois, actually. But yeah, the movie feels so 80s in so many ways. Obviously, there is touches against the beginning of the decade, so there are touches of the 70s in there too, obviously. But yeah, the whole thing is just very dirty, and the music is all like synthesizy. But yeah, it's certainly very of its time, and I would say one thing that I think is interesting about it I think has positives and negatives to it. And we can maybe talk about both of them. But one thing that it's doing that action movies today I think have gone a little bit away from, which I think is a bad thing, is that they let Kurt Russell, and really I think all the people in the movie, kind of just be real people, in the sense that while it is partially an action movie to a certain extent, it lets Snake, he's not perfect. He's not totally jacked. He's built, I mean, I don't know if he should be in a little bit slightly better shape for what he's been doing. But anyway, he's more realistically proportioned. He isn't invulnerable to, if he does something that would hurt somebody, it hurts him. And so he's allowed to be vulnerable, and it's a bit more realistic in that sense.
Yeah, it's interesting because I feel like there's more stakes there, even though we expect that he's going to be able to succeed in his mission, there's a real concern also that maybe he won't. Like maybe he'll be a few minutes or a few seconds too late, and the little tracer is going to go off and blow him up in his bloodstream, or maybe he won't be able to get the president in time, and they won't kind of follow through on their deal, or maybe he's going to fall prey to these creeps that live underground, or there's any number of scenarios that are plausible. And so it's different than seeing a superhero where you're like, okay, I mean, it's Captain America. He's going to find a way out of this. And I know there's going to be people that are like, no, superheroes have been kind of like they've become like vulnerable to different fates. I get that. That did happen, but I think seeing it in this real world scenario, even though it's a fake version of the real world, I do think it adds more of a grounded sense and helps us to relate to him more as a character. Another thing I love about this movie is that it has a lot of decent character development, even if it's just little tiny bits of it. So the bad guys aren't just bad guys and faceless, but you really kind of get to know them a little. And they're played by such interesting types and interesting looking people. And, you know, even the ones that I might not remember their names, I'm like, oh man, that guy, like, he had some really interesting moments. And I also enjoyed the little things like Ernest Borgnine's cabbie. I thought he was a wonderful character. If anything, I wish that we could have gotten even more time with him.
Mm-hmm.
But that was a fun little Easter egg for me because I'd sort of forgotten about Ernest Borgnine being in this movie because it's been a while since I've seen it. And then I was like, oh, it's Marty.
Hey, Marty.
So, yeah.
Well, it's funny because when watching the credits for this, I knew that Kurt Russell was in it, obviously. You know, then it says stuff like Lee Van Cleef. I'm like, oh my god, Lee Van Cleef is in this. And it's
Yep.
Otis Borgnine. I'm like, Otis Borgnine's in this.
Yep.
And Donald Pleasant's in this. Isaac Hayes.
Yep.
Isaac Hayes is in this. Harry Dean Stanton.
Yeah.
Harry Dean Stanton. And so it's this.
Yeah.
It just keeps like it's this really nice stacked cast of people.
I know Carpenter has talked in interviews about how this movie, you know, he probably wouldn't have gotten to make it had it not been for Halloween and how successful that movie was. And this is very different, but he was inspired by a couple different things. He's talked about how the Watergate scandal, like, really kind of energized him to have a lot of, not contempt, but just skepticism of the government and particularly the presidential office. And I'm sure that that was a sentiment shared by a lot of people that lived during that time. And then he had also seen Death Wish with Charles Bronson, where a fairly like ordinary guy ends up kind of going on this spree to get revenge for the death of his wife.
But he said he didn't like the message or theme of that movie though. But he liked
right. But he thought it was interesting that, you know, I guess the character, I haven't seen Death Wish, so that's on me, but the character starts out as an architect and he liked the idea of a sort of ordinary person being in those extraordinary circumstances. So interesting inspirations, but, you know, as we talked about before, and as I mentioned, I think this one has some political allusions that would still perhaps feel relevant today. I mean, there's a lot about the police and the criminal justice system and the fact that all these criminals are just basically like left on an island to either kill each other or die, or, you know, they're trying to contain them is really interesting. And there's I think it's when the person who's piloting the president's plane, I think she says that they're taking action against this racist police state. And so I was like, oh, well, that's interesting. Because even though this movie doesn't delve into race too much in my mind, I do find it interesting that even then there was some critique of that aspect of the justice system and of criminal justice.
There's a question that near the end of the movie where Kurt Russell asks one of the kind of more reputable, quote unquote, characters in the movie. He asks him, well, how do you feel about the people that have, you know, died to get us to this point? And the guy's like, well, of course, you know, they should be honored for what they did and blah, blah, blah. But it's really kind of obvious, despite the fact that this person is saying that, oh, you know, these people, you know, died for a just cause and they should be honored and all that stuff. He really doesn't care that much really about them at all.
Yeah.
And, you know, there's this, you can tell, it's almost like Snake, because of, especially with something that happens directly after that, that almost seemed like a test by Snake of, I can help you one more time to do something, or I can screw you over. And if you answer this question right, and the person did not answer the question right, and it kind of confirms Snake's cynicism that despite this person being somebody who should care about other people, especially people that are maybe not the best people, but are sort of helping to do a good thing. Those persons should care about them, and they really just don't at all. They just care about themselves and stuff like that. So that I thought was a subtle bit of commentary about people who are in that position.
Yeah, there's definitely a sense that the sacrifices of these people that didn't have to do this, but did it because, they felt it was the right and moral thing to do, were like, oh, that's just kind of expected. Like, that was nice of them, kind of. And it's just, it's almost dismissive in how casual it is. I also thought about how this movie was probably released in a time when a lot of people were still thinking about the aftermath of Vietnam and the people who had died there, and whether or not they felt that that was a cause worth dying for. And even the ones that did come back had, a lot of obstacles to overcome and a lot of trauma to overcome. So
Well,
I have to think there was some resonance there.
well, yeah. I mean, because you think about you've had over the course of like a 20-year period, you've had Kennedy has been killed. You've had
Mm-hmm.
Johnson and his stumbles with Vietnam. You've had Nixon and Watergate. You've had Gerald Ford pardoning Nixon. We've had, I mean, God bless Jimmy Carter, but he had a bit of a bumpy presidency. So you've
Sure.
had this very kind of rocky 2-decade period where people have been killed and have lied and have put us into conflicts that we probably shouldn't have been in, and then more people have died and atrocities have been done, and there's been more lying, and then people that have done the lying have just gotten off scot-free, and nobody seems to care, and it's this whole thing. So yeah, I could sense at the beginning of the 80s that there's a lot of frustration with the people in charge of the country.
And that was, I think there was a real kind of wave of political films in the 70s that were kind of paranoid thrillers and all about spies and conspiracies. And that bleeds into the 80s a little bit. Of course, that's going to
Hmm.
bleed into the next movie that we're talking about. But I think before that, in the immediate aftermath of World War II, which most people at the time, and I think even now, thought of as a very just cause and a very worthy thing to have sacrificed for, and where everybody was sort of on the same page about it. It seems. I'm sure I'm exaggerating. That's not entirely true, but so in the aftermath of World War II, you had a lot of movies about celebrating the war effort, celebrating the sacrifices, and talking about vets coming back from the war, and these stories that were very celebratory. And even the westerns, right,
Mm-hmm.
that came out around that time were very like rah rah USA. And so going into the 70s, late 60s, early 70s, where you're starting to see the fallout from Vietnam and all these other things you mentioned, it's definitely a big change for the entertainment industry, because we're no longer like celebrating how great it is to be patriotic and American. It's like something's rotten here, right?
Yeah.
So I guess on that note, we talked about how there's connections between the politics of that time and some of the things that are going on now. And I feel like, with a few, very few exceptions, we haven't really seen this same kind of themes in our entertainment as were happening back then. Why do you think that is? Or do you completely disagree with me and you think that there are a lot of movies that speak to our current moment
No,
politically?
I think there's certainly a lot of movies that speak to our current moment, particularly, and I think even action films, there would be some that you could find that would speak to that. I think maybe part of the reason why it seems like there hasn't been lately is as soon because things are so divisive right now, and because of movies that would say things like that now would be so instantly ganged up on by the people who disagree with that message and want to silence it. They aren't, you see Escape from New York and it's going to be, oh, let's just go see, this John Carpenter action film, and Lee Van Cleef is going to be in it, and Donald Pleasance and a younger Kurt Russell, blah blah blah, and you just kind of go and you have fun, and then you can also maybe think about whatever and stuff. But then now, if you were to make that, it seems like, oh, did you see the Escape from New York movie? It was so political and blah 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 blah. Why
Mm-hmm.
can't we just have a fun action movie thing or blah blah blah? I feel like an age you could just go, and not that I'm not saying there weren't people who disagree with it, whatever, but that you could more the masses would more just watch it and rather wouldn't realize the political stuff, or just wouldn't care, or would agree with it more and stuff. So more people were going to watch it, and it's going to become more better known, and people are going to be more aware of it nowadays and stuff. Whereas now the stuff isn't going to be seen as by many people because people are going to complain about it and aren't going to watch it because they disagree with it or whatever. And again, it gets so drowned out. People talk more about the people who are arguing about it than the film itself, so that gets drowned out. And so it just isn't seen as by many people, and the other arguments just distract from it and stuff. So I think people kind of forget that those things are getting made because they aren't just being as readily absorbed. There has to be all these arguments about it and stuff. So yeah, I think they're certainly getting made and stuff. It's just it's hard for them to break through in the popular culture and to as many people as they used to, just because of current divisiveness.
Yeah, that's a fair point. I mean, back when this came out, we didn't have social media to immediately know what everybody thought of it, even before it came out. There were critics, obviously, but I think the critics mostly liked this, and the public ate it up. I mean, it grossed like almost 5 times what it was made for, I think.
It was
So
like 20 something, yeah.
yeah, so I mean, it made a lot of money, obviously enough for a sequel. The sequel is pretty good. I don't think it's quite as good as the original, but there are a couple things I like about it a little bit more. So I'm contradicting myself a bit. In terms of just like pure action movie that gets in, gets out, and still has an interesting message to it and still has time for character development, this is 99 minutes. So, nice brisk pace. It feels very lean. It doesn't feel like there's any wasted time. And I think this movie definitely still holds up, even though it's set in a future that is in our past. The next movie we'll be talking about is Blowout, and it is directed by Brian De Palma, came out on July 24th, 1981. And this one stars John Travolta, Nancy Allen, John Lithgow, and Dennis Franz. There's a few other folks in there, but those are the main people that you'll be seeing. And I've seen a lot of De Palma, not every De Palma, but I would say this is in my top 3 of his movies. This is released by the Criterion Collection, by the way. So if you want to pick up a copy of it, that's where you'll go. The basics of this movie, and if this plot sounds familiar, there will be somewhat of a reason. Mm-hmm. The basics of this movie are John Travolta is Jack. He is a guy who creates sound. He is a Foley artist, but also he records, sounds out in the field and kind of brings them in for really kind of B and lower grade movies that his friend is making. He's hoping to get into the movie industry and kind of do a little bit more, but right now he's still kind of doing these sleazy movies. And so he's trying to find a new recording of Wind for his friend, which I find hilarious that he needs some new wind to record. He's trying to find some new wind. And so he goes out at night and he's standing on a bridge and he gets, some owls and some frogs and some wind. And then all of a sudden he hears a loud crash and he sees a car careening off the bridge and into the water below. He ends up going down to see what's going on and has to rescue one of the people in the car, who is played by Nancy Allen. And as it turns out, the other member of the other passenger in the car who did not make it was a presidential hopeful, and many people thought he was going to be the president. So
he was the governor too at that time.
Yeah, he was also the governor. So he was already kind of a famous politician in his own right. And as the story goes on, of course, anything political is going to have a lot of eyeballs on it and a lot of handlers. And there are people trying to tell Jack that he should keep his story to himself, that they don't want the tabloids to get a hold of this bad story about the governor now that he's gone, because he was a married man and this is not his wife. And Jack also listens back to the audio recording and he thinks he hears a gunshot, but he can't quite make it out because the car swerves ostensibly because there's a blown out tire. But Jack is just so sure that that's not really what happened. And so he starts to wonder if there was something more sinister going on. Was there an assassination? What is going on here, right? So he teams up with Sally, who is played by Nancy Allen, and they basically are kind of determining what to do next. Can they convince people? Sally's not sure if she really wants to be super involved with this because she's also got some secrets of her own. And yeah, the movie is a paranoid thriller that takes an interesting path, I'll say. And it's also, I think, one of John Travolta's very best performances. I think he is absolutely wonderful as Jack because he's perfect as this guy who's a little naive, but also like suspicious to a healthy extent, but maybe not suspicious enough. And he is really just a guy that's getting in over his head is what it comes down to. I don't want to give too much away if you haven't seen the movie, but you'll find early on that John Lithgow is not a guy you would want to spend any amount of time with in this movie. He's just a no good sack of beans. You do not want to be around him. Dennis Franz plays a sleazy character as well, who we find out may have had a reason for being involved in this whole mess. And he's also got a connection to Sally. And this whole thing is set during the Liberty celebration in Philadelphia, where they're going to be doing a big fireworks celebration and celebrating the Liberty Bell. And they're, kind of all leading up to that. So there's going to be a parade and fireworks and this, huge spectacle. And the movie incorporates those things into the story in a very interesting way. So I know you mentioned that this was your first time watching the movie. What was your initial reaction to it?
Well, it should be said that, and I'm sure you were going to get to this, but that the film was inspired. I don't know if there's actually any on-screen credit for it, but it was inspired or directly based off of a 1966 film called Blow Up by Michelangelo Antonioni, where I think it's around, well, the similar-ish things, but instead of them using audio, they're using photography.
In that one, it's about a guy who photographs models, and then he thinks he might have captured a murder on film by accident.
And it should be said also that Blow Up is also available through the Criterion Collection. So if both of these sound interesting, you can get both of them through the Criterion Collection. But anyway, it is inspired by that, and there were certainly inspirations from Hitchcock and certainly giallo films in this film. And I would certainly say Hitchcock, yes, and then I would certainly say definitely giallo. I'm very happy that we covered a giallo film in October because I did flashback a lot to The Bird with the Crystal Plumage doing this, and it's very much in the same vein of that and maybe slightly elements of Blue Velvet as well, in the sense that you have these two people like in Blue Velvet, like you have John Travolta's character like Kyle MacLachlan in Blue Velvet, and like whatever the actor's name was in Bird of Crystal Plumage. All three of those three characters that those actors play are all people who are not really are not involved in crime stuff. So John Travolta has his character has a linked to it that we'll probably might talk about. But they're primarily, John Travolta's a sound guy. Kyle MacLachlan was, I think, a college graduate or something. And the guy with Bird of Crystal Plumage was, I think, an artist or whatever the heck it was. Anyway, but they're not really involved in crime stuff, but they get caught up in these big mysterious things, and they kind of get in over their head. So you have that aspect of it, and you also have this element of not just mystery and thriller, but there's aspects of horror in there too, with John Lithgow's character, and with the beginning of it when you have this kind of fake horror movie and stuff. There's certainly, that has elements of stuff like Friday the 13th or Halloween, but it also has elements of kind of a giallo flavor as well in it too. So because especially with like something like, well, I guess all three of the films I've mentioned, but especially The Bird of Crystal Plumage, there is an element of thriller, but also sexual danger and sexual predators and stuff like that, which is certainly present in Blowout as well. And so I like that aspect of it, because I did really like Bird with Crystal Plumage, and I was happy to see something like this again so soon. I want to get into more Giallo films, so this kind of being Giallo-esque was exciting to me. And I loved the fact that John Travolta's character Jack was a sound designer.
Mm-hmm.
I have a great deal of respect, and I really can kind of jazzed about sign designers and the stuff they do. It just always sounds really cool and just kind of fun and stuff. And I want to kind of learn more about that stuff. So I was very happy to see. I mean, I don't know if I've ever seen a main character or maybe even any primary character in a movie be a sound guy in anything I've seen, even movies about Hollywood and film and stuff. So it was very exciting to see that and to see not only how he uses his knowledge of film, but his knowledge of sound to help him in his investigation and stuff. I thought was really cool. So yeah, those aspects are I really kind of jived into.
Yeah, this movie, I love that you made that Giallo connection because I would say, De Palma certainly is probably the most well-known American director I can think of that really incorporated Giallo elements into a lot of his early movies. And certainly that was the case with Sisters and with Dress to Kill, very much to a smaller degree with Carrie, but there's certainly a little bit in there that I think you could arguably make the case. And then with Body Double, that's another one. So yeah, he had a lot of influence there, I think, and he was definitely borrowing from some of his favorite creators, whether that was Hitchcock or Antonioni, like you mentioned, or The Conversation. All of those were definitely influences on this film. And I say that not to take anything away from the originality of this movie, because you're right, there aren't that many movies about a guy who's a sound guy. The only other one I can think of is a movie with Toby Jones called Berberian Sound Studio, in which he's actually portraying a guy who is a Foley artist for Giallo films and for Italian horror movies. So definitely watch that if you get a chance. That one was really interesting. But yeah, back to this one. So I love the look of this movie, which is signature De Palma. He was working with Vilmos Sigismund, who had done a few of his other movies and who also did McCabe and Mrs. Miller and some other kind of 70s landmark films. And he has a very specific look to his movies. I think if you've seen Carrie, you probably remember that early scene in the shower where it's all steamy and you see the girls walking around. That certainly gets alluded to in this with the movie within the movie of Coed Frenzy, right? There's another kind of steamy shower scene, and that also happens in Dress to Kill, and I'm pretty sure several other De Palma movies, so that's kind of a De Palma trademark. But this is a love letter to film in so many ways, and watching it in this era where most movies now are not made like this. They're shot digitally, and the sound, can get re-recorded as ADR, and this is so different, and it shows the real labor of love that went into even like crappy, horror sleaze movies that they were making, that they really cared about getting it right, getting that scream right in that shower scene, right? Like that's what is sort of the motivating thing here throughout this movie, is that there's a girl who's been cast as the one who gets, kind of attacked by the killer in a shower, and she screams, and her scream is just like so bad. And so it's distracting. And even though they talk about how they didn't hire her for that, they hired her for something else that was a part of her physique, shall we say.
It's a couple things she might have that might be
a couple things she brought to the picture. Yeah. They still felt the scream was just distractingly bad, which they're not wrong. So they're on this kind of hunt to cast the perfect scream, and that in itself provides a nice, fun subplot for anybody who loves movies, particularly horror movies. And it's also, I think, a love letter to the paranoid thrillers of the 70s, right? I mean, we talked a little bit about The Conversation, but also, something like 3 Days at the Condor, or so many other things that came out during that time, even all of The President's Men, right? Like this, again, is in the wake of Watergate. It's in the wake of the 60s, where there were a lot of high-profile assassinations. And so, yeah, that definitely figures into the plot of this movie.
Well, we'll probably get more into the political stuff in a second, but I will say about that before I forget. This was, I think, inspirations for De Palma were, again, Watergate, and also the, how I always pronounce it wrong, the Chappaquiddick thing with
Oh yeah, with Teddy.
with
Yeah.
Ted Kennedy and stuff. Back to the love of film thing. Just seeing like what you have to do to get sound and stuff was really great. Like the whole scene before even the car comes and crashes into the body of water and stuff. Just him, like you said, capturing the sound and stuff. I loved that. It was very interesting. And then seeing how you cut that stuff together with film and then all the stuff it was, or the process of trying to find somebody who can just dub over or scream real quick. That they're not going to be in the movie properly. They're not going to be credited. You just need somebody to scream and for 5 seconds, and then that'd be the whole process and stuff. Yeah, it's really interesting stuff and to have in the middle of this political thriller noirish film. So yeah, I love that.
Yeah, I really was thinking this time through how this is such a contrast to All the President's Men, where, yes, it's like a corrupt politician, which, of course, this really happened and everything. It's a corrupt politician, but two savvy reporters are basically able to save the day by getting the truth out there. And I've thought in recent years and with recent developments how it almost that could not even happen today because people don't care what journalists have to say unless it's backing up what they already believe. And in this movie, Jack tries to make connections with the police and with journalists. And it's like people either want to exploit his findings and use it for their own gain, or they don't want anything to do with it because they're like, la, 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 let's pretend this didn't happen because it makes it too much more complicated if we actually air the truth. And Jack's like, yes, but this is the truth. This is what happened. And I think it's the cop that says, but what does it matter to you whether it happened or not? Like, it's going to hurt his wife or he's like, this guy basically died a hero and one of his bills got passed this morning. Let's leave his legacy alone. Right. And you have to think like those are probably conversations that could plausibly happen behind the scenes. I'm not a huge conspiracy theorist. I think they're kind of dangerous, but I also think that this movie sheds light on the types of conversations that could potentially be happening in back rooms in higher up places. And it's a situation where you're not sure who you can trust with the truth.
There's a backstory to Jack that might explain why maybe he's sort of obsessed with justice and all that stuff. And there is a bit of a tragic past to him. And I am of two minds about it, because one, I do think that this backstory gives him a bit more of a reason to act the way he does and be so obsessed with getting the truth out. But I'm also, things that I don't like about it is how it factors into the end of the film, which we'll talk about vaguely later. But also the fact that it makes him, the thing I like so much about, like, again, like Blue Velvet and Bird of the Crystal Plumage is that it is these totally normal people being thrown into something that they're not really trained or equipped to deal with, but they have to with the best means that they can and the skills that they do have in the areas that they are experts in. And it starts out like that way with Jack. He's just using his skills as a sound person to help solve this. But then when you have this backstory, it makes him a bit more of a special guy in a way. He's less of an average Joe, which I didn't quite like that element to it. Did you get that at all? Or how did you feel about that bit of backstory that they give him?
Well, it did help for me to understand his motivation because we've known him up to that point as just, somebody that's trying to break into the entertainment business. And I think that shows he was already someone who had an interest in doing the right thing and rooting out injustice or rooting out corruption. And so I think I liked that connection. And I know what you're saying about it gives him almost a little bit of a leg up in terms of his expertise, but based on the outcome of that side story, you could also argue the opposite, that he was too green even for that assignment. And now he's trying this again and he's hoping to succeed where he perhaps failed in the past. And is he going to make the same mistakes or is he going to learn from them? So I found that was an interesting sort of development for his character rather than an impediment for me. Nancy Allen I absolutely adored. She was also, of course, in Carrie, and when this movie was made, she was married to De Palma, and so he was a little hesitant to put her in it just because he was like, well, I don't want people to just think you do my movies. But, it turned out fine. I think she was absolutely perfect because she has just that right amount of kind of like innocence, but she's also been caught up in something a little nefarious herself. And so she's also got a little bit of redemption that she's trying to claim. But I just love her character. She's so bubbly. She's this makeup artist who, when she finds out that John Travolta's in the movie, she's like,
I really love movies, It's a very interesting subject to me because I do makeup.
Do you?
Yeah. I mean, right now it's only behind the counter Corvettes, but I have this dream about doing makeup for movies. I've seen these big movie stars like Barbra Streisand, They don't do her right.
No.
I know how to fix her face.
I just love how bubbly she is. She's full of life. She's full of personality, and she's kind of game for whatever. And I enjoyed that. I think she's a character that we really get to know, not just as, a victim of circumstance, but somebody who is really trying to do something for herself. And, even the perhaps mistakes that she makes in this movie are ones that are understandable.
She does things in the movie that are not good and a bit nefarious, but I don't feel like she does still seem like an innocent, really. Like, I feel like she doesn't really understand the scope of what she's being kind of more led into and stuff. And people are lying to her about the purposes of it and stuff. And she does seem more kind of an innocent child who's just thinks she's doing the right thing or just doing something that's slightly bad, but really not that big of a deal. And it isn't until she gets more into these things that she realizes kind of what she's gotten into. So I was going along with this movie. I was liking it quite a bit. The end of the movie kind of has a full circle type of thing with Jack's backstory that you get. And the subplot of the Scream is taken care of in this little portion as well. And I found the ending to the film, while maybe appropriate in certain ways, I found very frustrating, and in some cases I found it okay. Well, I guess I'll break down the 2 points in terms of the backstory, kind of wrapping up or doing full circle for the backstory of Jack. I felt like with the movie's ending being what it is, I kind of felt like, well, what was the point of this? With the way that it ends, is it just to show things are going to kind of go this way for him or going to be like this for him? And then the wrap up of the Scream, the way that the Scream is obtained, I understood, and I felt that was kind of okay. But the way the ending goes to then use the Scream in the fictional movie that Travolta is getting sound for, I felt was, well, I understand the headspace that he is in is not the best. I felt was in very poor taste. And maybe not like his character. It's like, why would you ever use the Scream in this context? I don't really get it. It just seemed not, I don't know, I just found it very frustrating. So the ending, I was up to it a lot. I was going to give the film like 4 stars. This kind of cut a half star off because I just did not like the ending. But how did you feel about that and the points that I brought up?
Totally understand where you're coming from. A lot of people felt that way when it came out. Critics generally liked the movie, including some very hard to please critics like Pauline Kael really loved it. But audiences, not as much. It did not make back its full budget at the box office. And word kind of got around about the ending, which seems to have detracted people. But me personally, I like it, although I would have also been happy for it to go a different direction. I think it's honest with how at least a certain segment of the population maybe was feeling at that time, of like, it captures a headspace that people might be in if they feel like they've put forth a lot of effort to try to change things and get to a certain point, and it's like, well, this is bigger than me, and so I'm not really ever going to be able to change it. So I'm just kind of like throwing up my hands and burying myself in other types of work. And I got the sense that that's sort of what's happening with Jack, is that he's like, well, this part of my career as like an activist or somebody who's trying to change the system is clearly not going to be a part of my life anymore. So I'm just going to double down on these, sleazy movies and just make something out of it. And that's why the Scream gets incorporated, even though we see his reaction to that. And so I still think it's it's an act that happens in the aftermath of a very unusual circumstance. And I think even after, he has made that decision, he maybe instantly regrets it. All right. So now it's time to dive into some coming soon films for specialty labels. And happily, as of this recording, Criterion has released their slate for November. So a few of these have been a part of the collection already, but these are just new versions. And then there are some that are brand new to the collection. So we have Daisies, a Czechoslovakian new wave film directed by Vera Chytilova. And if you haven't seen it, it's an anarchic good time that features two rebellious teenage girls just having a blast. I love that movie, and I would love to talk about it one day. Also, In the Mood for Love. And this one, of course, is directed by Wong Kar-wai. So as you might recall, Wong Kar-wai had a box set that came out on Criterion last year, I believe it was. And this movie had already been a part of the Criterion Collection at one point, but it was out of print for a long time. Now it's coming back into print on its own, and it will be available on Blu-ray. Additionally, we have Malcolm X, the Spike Lee movie, starring Denzel Washington. Again, this one was also available on DVD from the Criterion Collection for a while, but now it is available, or will be available on Blu-ray. And then the final two are the ones that will be brand new to the collection. So we have Jane Campion's The Power of the Dog, which of course came out last year and was nominated for Best Picture and was my favorite movie of last year. Then we also have the Infernal Affairs trilogy, and this is a wonderful Hong Kong cinema trilogy. If you've seen The Departed, Martin Scorsese's movie, that is based on the first Infernal Affairs. So definitely worth seeking this one out when it becomes available. And that is what Criterion has lined up for us. And then one final thing I'll mention before I turn it over to Tim for his picks is that Imprint, which is an Australian label, is coming out with a film noir set that I know I'm going to want to pick up. This one is going to be available for purchase on August 31st. So perhaps by the time you hear this, it'll be much closer to coming out. And this noir collection includes The Strange Love of Martha Ivers, which is a wonderful film with Barbara Stanwyck. Also, No Man of Her Own, featuring Barbara Stanwyck, again, another person that we've talked about on this show, I believe, before. And also, I just happened to have read the book upon which this is based this summer. So it was based on a Cornell Woolrich novel. And then The Turning Point and Desperate Hours are the final two in this collection, which I can't say I know tons about, but I am definitely curious to dig into these. So that is what I'm looking forward to. Tim, what about you?
There's a movie from Flickr Alley called The Black Vampire, or El Vampiro Negro, subtitle Return of the Lost Noir Classic. But there's a label, a smaller-ish label called Classic Flicks, which is classic, and then Flicks FLIX, which is a small label, but it still does some nice stuff that I have picked up. Actually, I think all of them film noirs, oddly enough. But I bring this up only to say that sadly, Classic Flicks is not on social media anymore. At least it's not on Twitter. So I think this is not as well known because people, I think these days, tend to find out about the stuff through Twitter a lot. At least I do. But they are having a super summer sale where Blu-rays are starting at $9.98. I think shipping is cheaper. So go check out. They do have some nice stuff. They have a lot of people who are interested in Little Rascals. They have a lot about stuff from them. They have some nice film noir stuff in there as well. So if you're interested in getting involved in yet another sale, because there are so few of them.
You can never have enough.
No, you can never have enough. Go check that out. I don't know. It doesn't say. I don't see immediately on the site how long the sale will last. Summer is obviously coming to an end soon, so I don't know by the time this comes out if it will be over. Hopefully it's not, but go to the site. It's on their banner as we record this, so if it's not there anymore, the sale is probably over. But if it is still going on, do try to take advantage of that if you can. They do put out some nice stuff.
All right, so for a preview of what we've got coming up on future episodes of the show, you can be waiting with bated breath for our September episode. We'll be returning to the golden age of television. You might recall that we talked about the first 4 movies on this Criterion Collection set. As you may recall, these are teleplays that were filmed basically live, and then I think all but at least one of them were put into actual longer feature film movies at one point or another. So the ones we'll be talking about this next time will be the other 4 on the collection: Bang the Drum Slowly, Requiem for a Heavyweight, The Comedian, and Days of Wine and Roses. So that should be a great discussion. And then for October, we want to get the hairs on the back of your neck standing up. So we're going to talk about 2 Alfred Hitchcock movies. One is The Lodger, a story of the London fog, and the other is Notorious. So get ready for those. Those are both on Criterion. For our 3rd anniversary, our 3-year anniversary of the show, we are going back to Twin Peaks. So you might recall that in our 2nd year anniversary show, we talked about Twin Peaks Fire Walk with Me, and we also talked about the first 2 seasons of the show. Now we will be talking about Twin Peaks The Missing Pieces, as well as Twin Peaks The Return. So we've got some watching to do between now and then, and we're super eager to go back to the little town of Twin Peaks and all the eerie goings on there. And of course, in the meantime, you can follow us on Twitter. My name on Twitter is @RosalieLewis.
And mine is @CenterPackRat, and you can find links to my YouTube channel, where if you liked our little discussion on the Before trilogy last time, just a reminder, you can find reviews for the first 2 of those films on there, and there's going to be some goodies to come on there as soon as I can get those done. I'm hoping by sometime next month. As I record this, that is September, so hopefully by sometime in September, those goodies will be out. I don't want to reveal too much of it at this time, but I'm very excited for it to come out, so do keep your eyes on that.
And you can also follow along with our parent site, which is 25yearslatersite.com, and on their Twitter @25YL Media. Or you can also follow along with their individual feeds. There's TV Obsessive _ Horror Obsessive, Sports Obsessive, and Film Obsessive _. So that's all their various brands. Thank you so much for listening, and till next time, stay tuned.